My name's McKenna. I work for an organisation called the Collections Trust. We have been around for roughly 30 years, so this is pre-CRM by a long way. And I'm hoping that one of the things that, given what Dominic's just said, is pity the poor curator, collections manager in this work. So, is this the terrible truth? Here's a group trying to provide access to cultural information without standards. Do you recognise anybody in the photograph? Those in the UK of a certain age, you probably know who they are, but it's just to give you an idea of people not communicating with each other, not talking about things. So there's no communication. In actual fact, they are the goons. In fact, the earliest goons. The only person you might recognise is the man on the extreme right, who is Peter Sellers. Okay, so what is a standard? And this is a definition that was on the BSI, British Standards Institute definition, and it's something that's agreed, something that's published, something that's used consistently. As a rule, guideline definition, standards help to make life simpler. If they don't make life simpler, they're not a standard. And also they bring together the experience and expertise of all the interested parties. Here's what we're working with, and it's a quote that appeared on Dominic's website from Martin, and it's about a museum object. It's a witness to the past. It's about understanding contexts, and typically you can't classify things under subjects, and it lives by taking into account all known facts. So in a museum, that's the target that you should be aiming for. Of course, the task is a little bit different. So this is what the user sees. They see the lovely, fantastic objects. In this case, a lovely woman balanced in the air. So what's the reality? Well, actually, it's the unicyclist. And that's, I think we can safely say that it is a skilled person or set of people that need to be working on standards, need to be implementing the standards. So, here's a model about the metadata use environments in cultural heritage, but particularly in museums. So there's a collections management environment where there's management of the objects, cataloguing information, and they're creating management and descriptive metadata. And here the concept should be maximum detail, preservation of data, and then there'll be domain-specific schemes, even country-specific schemes, and heaven forfend, individual organisations schemes. You may want to harvest that information into a service environment, and here what we're doing is providing content delivery and meaningful access and indexing. The problem, I think, with most systems, and I will pump the boot into Europeana and all other systems, is there isn't meaningful access. It's very, very difficult to produce. And here you might have cross-domain, probably, usable quality, reasonable speed of delivery, and rights protection. The other thing that might happen in the service environment, you might get responses to your service, and that should be being imported back into your system. And finally, there's a discovery environment where you're searching and choosing and trying to find things that you're interested in. One of the problems with the examples that Dominic showed from the Fitzwilliam and from Tyne and Weir was that the they were trying to do both things in the same system. So the actual data is Dublin Core-like, but unfortunately it's misuse of Dublin Core. So there's no, whereas when we were developing an idea of how to use Dublin Core in CME, we came up with it, you should have a Dublin Core record for the real thing, Dublin Core record for its digital surrogate, and what's happening is it's all getting put together. So that's where you get idiotic things like the publisher of a medieval piece of pottery is the museum, or the creator of it is the museum, or the date of it is 1984. So that's one of the problems in everyday life. So in the UK, there's a slew of different types of museum organisation, running from national organisations, local government organisations, independent ones, which might actually be private ones or organisational ones, trusts, some sort of charity, volunteer, community-run museums, university museums, and military museums. And of course, they will want to have different types of subjects, ranging from history to social history. This is just a list that I came up with. Agriculture, geographic region, television, everything you can possibly think of, there's a museum of. There's even a museum of the lawnmower, the National Museum of the Lawnmower in the UK. So what we wanted to do when we started to create how do you manage information associated with all this stuff is an organisation that grew out of something called IRGMA in the 1970s, which was the information retrieval group of the Museums Association. And that was creating a set of cataloguing and management cards. And I think at least one person in the room can remember those days. Which
There was an underlying standard prior to the cards.
Yeah. And then in 1977, the organisation which is now the Collections Trust, the Museum Documentation Association, was created. And from about 1979 till about 1990, they were processing data on behalf of museums. So this was at a time when most, if not virtually all museums, didn't have computers, even though they were trying to use them. We also developed the Museum Object Data Entry System, MODES, which became a cataloguing system. Also, between 1990 and 2000, we started with the MDA data standard, Spectrum itself, which came out in 1994, and a set of advisors on how to use Spectrum. I'm right in saying, I hope, that Spectrum was one of the inputs into creating the CRM, in that, you know, the idea that the CRM is something that's wildly intellectual is not correct. It's based on everyday experience of museums and other cultural organisations. We developed various things to interpret Spectrum, a series of books called Standardisation, including one on archaeology, set up an advisory service, set up a website called Collections Link, and from 2008 we relaunched MDA's Collections Trust, because we weren't all to do with museums, it wasn't all to do with documentation, and we weren't really an association. There are also translations of Spectrum into Dutch and the Belgian-speaking, Dutch-speaking part, the Flemish people, one for German, one for Portuguese, and also that includes Brazil as well. And also we developed a cultural collections management standard, which is a publicly available specification, which widens the concept. So that what we're trying to do with Spectrum and all the work of Collections Trust is to make this work for people in everyday use. So it's very, very practical. It's very aimed at non-experts, potentially, you know, volunteers, and so on. So how did we create it? Well, Originally there was a single editor who came from the Victoria and Albert Museum to develop it, and if you look at their system at that time, Spectrum looks remarkably similar to that. As I said, the aim was to be practical, but also to be non-prescriptive. And it was tested by the community, so that varied from national museums, including the British Museum, to small volunteer-run ones in the very north of the British Isles, in the Orkney Isles. And it worked. So the result was a very large A4 binder costing £70. That was probably 150 euros at the time now. And the idea was to make this a practical thing. So, what's in it? So what's in Spectrum? You'll get to hear it's sort of an acronym, but nobody ever uses it, so you can forget about learning what that is. It just gives you the idea of the spread of activities in museums specifically. So it's 21 collection management activities, and what happens, and they're all interrelated to each other. So in other words, the idea is to, what to do, what to record, where to look for help, and there's also a definition of information requirements in terms of information groups, and those are made up of units of information. We don't call them fields, we don't call them elements. That's because historically when Spectrum was created, people didn't necessarily have a computer system, so it should be able to work in paper-based systems, and it does. In terms of some of these procedures are more equal than others, here's a set of ones which are specifically aimed at the accreditation system in the UK. So that's in terms of object entry, loans in, and so on. And these are the things that most museums in the UK, certainly and probably in the world, use on a daily basis. And then there are a set of other ones as well. There's a pre-entry one which was inputted from an archaeology guide. And then things like risk management, rights management, and so on. And these units of information, it's a piece of information you should record. It's not always a field in a database, usually is nowadays. And you have a unit name, a definition, how to record it, examples, use, so its relationship with other units, and which group it appears in. And this is the thing that I think Martin and others used to look at and create the CRM, amongst other things, obviously. So and this was again created by the community. It wasn't something that was invented, and to be honest, it's a reasonably, good thing. So why do we want to have anything to do with the CRM? Good question. Again, just the groups. Here's the different types of things. They're remarkably similar to things in the CRM. Here's the spread of the world. So all the ones in brown are countries that have downloaded Spectrum. There are museums in Greenland, and I regularly send emails, can you have a look at this? They still haven't got them to download it. Also, the dodgy countries in the world seem not to like it either. So, okay, so, and the CRM. So what we want to do is three things. The first thing is to formalise the mapping from Spectrum units information to the CRM. It was partly done in the past by Nick Crofts, and that's slightly changed the CRM, I think. But I've heard recently from Richard that he's done an update to that, so that might have already been done.
Well, I've done part of it.
Well.
And I've forwarded that to the group for information, so that's all right.
And the other thing that we want to do is to create a CRM extension for Spectrum procedures and processes. So it's looking at and I have a nasty suspicion it's not going to be that hard. And finally, I think the work with the CRM is what the CRM should be doing is a reference model, so I think we can use it to improve Spectrum. Thank you very much.